Welcome. My name is Laura, and you have not one, but two AP World History experts at your disposal for the next hour. We have AP programming every single afternoon this week. We are delighted that you are here to join us for this hour. We have AP US History up next after this hour, and then AP Bio. So we certainly hope you spread the word, let everyone know who is feeling uncertain or wants to study or just likes history or has nothing else to do and just wants to listen to us talk for an hour. Any of those categories, everyone should come to us. Journey and I are here to delight you for the next hour. So take a deep breath. Figure out what you need for this session. Are you a person who takes notes on paper? Do you prefer a tablet? Do you actually own a pencil? I bet you do. Find one if you need one, or grab a pen, or just have your tablet or phone nearby so that you can take some notes. This is about deciding what it is we can do for you to make your life easier. In case you have not heard, your AP test is going to be different this year, which you likely have summarized, even if you haven't heard that announcement. You are going to be taking an at-home 45-minute free response exam. We're going to get some more information about what that exam exactly is going to look like in terms of the question types in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, we know for sure what the content will be. And we're going to be going over today some of that content, the 1750 to 1900 range. And we're going to take a look at how to take the knowledge you already have and apply it to free response questions. We've got a lot in store for you today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You are going to find that this session is going to be most valuable for you if you can participate in the best way you know how. Feel free to yell back at your screen if that's the way you like to do it. We strongly encourage you to use the chat if you can. So I will be prompting you as we get to some questions, as we start brainstorming. I'll remind you, hey, if you have an answer, if you have an idea, throw it in the chat, and that'll make it that much more rewarding for you as we go throughout the session. So keep that in mind. We want to hear from you, and we want to make this work for you. So the first thing to talk about is exactly what we're going to be discussing, so you have an idea of what it is we're covering. American and French revolutions, because the test wants you to think like an historian, we're going to actually look at the similarities and differences. And then industrialization is a really meaty, or for vegans, a really proteiny topic that you can use for a lot of the FRQs. So that's what we're going for. These are all high yield topics. So we've done a lot of research and we know that the test is likely to ask about these. We're going to hop right into a question. So let's warm up your brains. Ready? Let's see how you're feeling. Okay, so first up, this is a stimulus-based question. You are going to answer a multiple choice question. As soon as I put the multiple choice question up on the screen, if you feel like you have an answer, feel free to throw it in the chat. It's fine if you answer incorrectly. We want you participating and we want you to learn from these questions. So before we hop into the question though, let's remind ourselves how to take a look at a stimulus. Looking at the title and any footnotes, it's a good idea. It's not for decoration. So take a look at this particular stimulus. The information at the bottom is actually super helpful. So of course, you're going to look at the title. In particular, you're looking at the date. We are in the 1750 to 1900 range, but this is from 1660. How does that work? If you were here yesterday, we talked about connecting the dots. So the ideas that happened in the previous time period then influenced what went on in this time period that we're talking about, 1750 to 1900. So I'm going to go ahead and put the question up on the screen. As soon as you feel like you have an answer, you can go ahead and put your answer in the chat. I'm just getting the timer for us. Go ahead and take a minute. And again, it's okay. If you don't answer this correctly, we'll explain why the correct answer is right after this minute. We have lots of participation in the chat. I'm so excited to see that. Thank you so much. Give yourselves a big round of applause for picking the correct answer, D. Okay, this was a multiple choice question. Your exam isn't going to have any multiple choice questions this year, but we wanted to start with content that you've likely seen in a format you've likely seen. So the good news is everyone involved in this process, from Kaplan to your teachers, to the College Board, to the colleges you will attend, we all want you to get college credit. So here at Kaplan, as test prep experts, we know that we can help you bridge the gap between multiple choice questions and free response questions. The question you might have is, wait, free response, okay, short answer, LEQ, DBQ, what is it gonna look like? We're gonna get more information. So in this session and throughout the rest of the week, we're gonna be doing a sprinkling of all the different kinds because it's actually a really similar skill to answer each one. So thinking about this correct answer, the idea that the Enlightenment ideals helped people to question, as I was talking about yesterday, question who they are, how they fit within society, how they feel about their religion, thinking about the individual and questioning authority. Let's see what this looks like. So this, we're not going to use a stimulus for, but this was to prompt our thinking and start getting us in the vein of these Enlightenment ideals. And we're heading over to, and actually, if you know what question type this is, feel free to throw it in the chat. Perhaps you've been studying the different formats. This is an original question type from what the exam was supposed to be. And it's very possible that they're going to adapt this question type. We don't have all the information yet, but we're going to show you what skills you need in order to answer all different free response questions. Yep, that's exactly right. Awesome. Yep, you know, this is a short answer question. So short answer questions are really unique in that you need to get your info on paper and it doesn't have to look pretty. You need to specifically answer the question asked to get your points, and that's it. So after we do this one, we're going to move into some high yield content, and then we're going to be looking at answers that have theses in them and contextualization and evidence. This in particular is all about getting your points. So when you're answering a question like that, you have to know exactly what is required. So each of these A, B, and C, they don't interact in any way. When a grader looks at each part, they are looking at it as if you wrote just that particular section. And so let's say you feel so good about A and B, and then C, you're like, oh, yikes. Concentrate on making A and B as good as possible. And then for C, write what you can, but know that it won't affect A and B. That's awesome. That's fantastic. It's like going up to bat in baseball. The innings are different. It doesn't matter what you did in the previous inning. Same thing with this. Okay, so we need to start off. We're going to focus only on A. We need to provide a specific idea about how Enlightenment ideas cause changes in government in particular. So I'm going to put a sample sentence, or sentences rather, up here. I'm going to give you a few moments to read through this sample, and then we'll pick apart the pieces that we really liked that were included. I wanted to make sure you didn't hear me yapping away while you were reading, because taking a look at this, your experience is an individual one. You are an individual. You need to think about what you could have done and what you already have in your brain to access to put on paper when you're answering a question like this, and what you want to write down on your tablet or on your phone or on your piece of paper to remind yourself of some ingredients within this really protein laden response. I was going to say meaty again, but in case we're not eating meat. Let's look at the components. All right, so the first part of this, Enlightenment ideas of liberty, because that's not stated in the short answer question. Part A doesn't say anything about liberty or equality. So anything additional you're adding value. You're marching your way toward your point on this question. So it directly supported, those ideas directly supported the sentiment that the people have the right to overthrow oppressive governments. Okay, that's not in the question stem. That's information you added value. Then you have a specific person. You don't need the date. If you have it and you know it and you're really sure about it, you can throw it in there. Life, liberty, and property. That's something the grader is going to love to see. Those are foundations of what Locke was discussing. And the piece that's really important here is the government's purpose is to protect the rights. So if the government is not upholding its side of the bargain, because Locke isn't saying, okay, everybody, do what you want to do. Oh, you don't really like what the countryside looks like. It's a revolution. It was really specific. There's a contract between government and its people. So that part is really, really important. So the purpose is to protect the rights. Okay, so what's missing from here, though, are some specifics about France's monarchy and how the people felt prior to the revolution. The good news is we're going to be covering that today. So this is a great start to this. It has a lot of ingredients, and you want to consider how you would have answered the question. And as we get towards the end of the session, it's going to be more of a choose your own adventure situation. So we're giving you a variety of ways to look at these questions and to start you thinking on how you're going to answer them. Also, too, we mentioned yesterday, you can't actually practice responding to one of these without writing it down. So you don't have to write every single one down. You can do a lot of brainstorming, but in order to feel really confident about the exam you're going to take, you do have to practice. Keep in mind, it will be an online test, so you can practice with typing. You don't have to write it out. If it makes your hand hurt, totally fine. You can also, if you want to submit your written response, you can take a picture and submit it for the online test. Just practice however you're planning on taking the test. But you actually do have to write it all out. I know that's a bummer, and I wish I could say it was different, but we're not going to lie to you. You really do have to practice. So speaking of which, let's go ahead and look at part B. So explain continuity in a political theory. There's a lot of different ways you could approach this. Go ahead and take a moment to look at this sample, well, these sample sentences. All right, we've got ingredients in here. So we have the idea that men, primary agents of change. That's just something I wrote. You can say it any way you want. You can say that men were political leaders, political participants. You want to keep in mind that you do specifically have to state how that was continued. So it's tradition that wasn't changed. And then the part here that really is going to catch a grader's eye is the fact that you know that women did not gain the right to vote until the early 20th century. That is specific information. Did you notice I didn't put an exact date for a couple of reasons? It was different all across the world. And also just saying early 20th century is plenty. You would want to expand on it a little bit, but this is the gist of what you could put into one of your short answers. And we have some great ideas in the chat. If you have an idea of what you could add, please share it, because you're not only helping yourself by running through the process of what you'd have to do for a real question, you're also helping everyone who's here today. So please definitely participate in the chat, and you're going to see an improvement for yourself and for others. That's perfect. That's what we're all about. We want to make sure everybody has what they need. Speaking of which, I'm having trouble with my mouse, and I'm going to go ahead and fix it. I have hot corners here, so I gotta, there we go. I just sent a lovely thought up to whichever being is in charge of PowerPoint, and it worked. We're all good now. All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and look at C. Oh, here we go. All right, so I'm going to use my trackpad to make sure we stay on track. I'm going to go ahead and clear out what I wrote and move on. All right, part C. So we have to make sure we explain how they spread outside Europe and brought change to other regions. Okay, so this part is going to have more of an overview, and in the chat, please put what specifics you would want to add. So what do you know specifically from Africa, India, or Latin America? Go with what you know best. Go ahead and put some specifics from Africa, India, and Latin America. So which one do you know best? Or which one do you want to study some more and you feel like you can become an expert on it? Go ahead and add that in. We strongly encourage you to use what you know well. So for example, my Aunt Millie, who's amazing, will tell you, because she's very honest, that she doesn't love history. Well, if Aunt Millie were taking this test, she would do great because she actually does love portions of history, in particular American Indians. And she would, if it were the APUSH exam, be able to talk about what she knows really well. So what is your jam? Are you all about Latin America? Do you know all about that? What about Africa or India? What is it that you know that you can use for this test? Haitian Revolution, Sepoy Rebellion. Yeah, Haitian Revolution, that one was very unique. Perfect. You can talk about American Revolution. This is just an example answer. Yep. If you want to think about that too, if you've been studying the American Revolution like most people have way more than other portions of history, use that to your advantage. You don't lose points. You can use whatever it is you already have in your head. That's what's really important about this test. Because it is all FRQ now, which all of the AP exams will be, that we're talking about today, so APUSH and AP Bio, those are all FRQs as well. You can then use that to your advantage. Make it work for you. All right. So speaking of the American Revolution, we're going to head over to one of our high yield content areas right after I remind you that the test is not only different in format, but different in content covered. So given that everything is really different, that you're probably doing stuff today that you didn't imagine this was going to be your day-to-day life. We understand, and College Board understands. So we're not covering on the exam, and by we I mean they're not doing anything beyond 1900. So if you've already gotten past 1900 in your course, that's not a bad thing. You still have value. You learned it, great. It's not going to be on the exam though, so you don't have to review it when you are getting ready for your AP exam. So just 1200 to 1900. That said, tomorrow we're finishing up 1750 to 1900. And then for Thursday and Friday, this is especially important for everyone, all of your friends who haven't yet heard about this change, make sure they come on Thursday and Friday. Make sure you come too, because we're doing all FRQs all hour long. So FRQ, FRQ, FRQ. We're going to make it fun because Journey and I are dorks and we love history, but we need to make sure you feel comfortable with the different FRQ types that could be on the exam. So make sure you come and hang out with us. We promise it will be less painful than you think it will be. So speaking of the American Revolution, I promised you for sure we were going to hit this area. So high yield content area, we've done a lot of research. We know this is something that very likely could be on the exam. So this is likely a lot of review for you. The major takeaway, and you're going to see this in the FRQ we're going to do, is the phrase taxation without representation. You just chant it around the house if you want. You could use it in an argument with your parents. I don't think it's going to go very well. Taxation without representation. So if you have any additional details, let's say you are all about the American Revolution, feel free to throw them in the chat. Share with us what it is about the American Revolution that you know and could use in an FRQ. But the biggest thing beyond knowing taxation without representation is being able to compare it to other revolutions, in particular, the French Revolution. Reason being, it was largely inspired by the American Revolution. So there's going to be a lot of commonalities. Some differences, though, are the social structure, the social structures of each. So take a look at this chart. Many of you likely have already learned this and are familiar with it. And there are pieces of this chart that are particularly important. We have some extensive taxes, not some, I mean extensive taxes. %98 of the population. And these are peasants, town folks, and merchants. Then we have the clergy and the nobility, 0 taxes. 0 taxes. Small amount of population. So you've got people not paying taxes, and then a ton of people paying a lot of taxes. This does not seem like it's going to end well. I feel like that, and given that it was in history, we know for sure it did not. One moment. There was some problems. I know, spoiler alert, right? There were quite a few grievances. We were talking about the 95 Theses yesterday. Among the peasantry, it was a problem. And you may remember famous things like, let them eat cake. Okay, they're starving, have no cake. This is not good. So knowing about the differences among taxation without representation and peasants starving, paying extensive taxes while the clergy and the nobility are not, it comes down to general unrest among large groups of people. And we're going to see that in an answer for an FRQ. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw upon what you've already been doing so far this year, which is a lot of multiple choice questions. So we're going to start with that. So we're going to dial it back, start with your multiple choice question, and then we're going to take this thinking and move on to an FRQ. So you're going to have a chance to read through this, answer a question, and you're going to do so in 1 minute. For a minute. Go ahead and take a minute to do this question. Let's try that again. Ready? We're gonna restart it. Hold on one sec. There we go. And I'm gonna make it stay where it is. Okay, go ahead and do this. As soon as you feel like you have an answer, go ahead and answer it in the chat. We've got answers coming in. If you got answer choice C, you are 100% correct. I also saw in the chat the question about let them eat cake, if that was truly said or not. History is a little tricky because we didn't have YouTube at the time. But it's the sentiment, the idea that the aristocracy was so out of touch with the peasantry, with the majority of the people in the country. So keeping that in mind. For this question, it is taking what we just talked about in French Revolution and considering it for the American Revolution. And the idea is that the Enlightenment helped people to consider how they wanted their government to treat them and what they should expect from their government. All right, so as we know, we are not going to have any multiple choice questions on the exam this year. So why do we start with this? Just to get you thinking and help you to consider what this question would have looked like if it were to be multiple choice, and taking that same line of thinking and applying it to an FRQ. That's our goal, is to bridge the gap between what you've been doing and what you're going to need to do to get your points. We have one more multiple choice question for you to consider for this before we get to our FRQ. I feel like you're ready for it. You can do it. We're going to give you one more minute. Ready, set, go. Loving the participation in the chat. Not only are we discussing the correct answer, we are discussing why the incorrect answers are wrong. That's awesome. And that's particularly helpful because you know you're not going to have multiple choice questions. You're going to have to think through all of this information on your own. So as you all correctly deduced, oops, heading back. We've got answer choice C. So let's look closely at B, because we had some confusion. Could it possibly be B? Okay, so first of all, figure out which one they're talking about. Are they talking about the American Revolution or are they talking about the French Revolution? Okay, so how many of you thought it was the American Revolution and then picked B because you thought that's what they were talking about? Because that will definitely make a difference. So when you answer a question, whether you're doing an FRQ or you're practicing with some multiple choice to get yourself warmed up, make sure you're looking at the question itself. And then once you get to the answer and check your answer, actually take a moment to figure out what went sideways for you, because it could be a couple different things. If in particular you misread the question stem, that's something to take note of, because for this year, for FRQs, the question stem is your guide to getting those points. If it was you were distracted by an incorrect answer choice, the good news is there are no distracting answer choices. You're just going to have to write what you know. So if it was the question stem itself, make sure that you're really sure that you know which section they're talking about. So if you got stuck on that question, no problem. You don't have to be an expert today. You have to be an expert when you take the exam, which is coming up, we know. All right, so heading on to what you will see on the exam this year. You're going to see an FRQ. I can't promise it's going to look exactly like this one, but the thinking is the same. So as we talked about yesterday, there are 3 components we are looking to accomplish. We want to make sure we have a thesis or a claim. We want to have our contextualization, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And we need to make sure we have some evidence. So thesis and a claim, contextualization, and evidence. Starting with thesis and a claim. Okay, go ahead and take a minute to read through the actual prompt and to take a look at this sample. So go ahead and do that for a few moments. Okay, so the piece that you have to make sure you're noticing is that it is 2, not 1, but 2, which makes sense because it would be really hard to do similarities among one thing. That would be a really weird answer. So you have to pick out 2, and you want to pick the 2 you know best. Is that French and American Revolution for you? Or would you pick something else? Tell us in the chat, which 2 would you have selected? Because it has to do with what you already have in your head or what you're excited to study. What would you have selected? Because this is about you. We want to make sure we're getting you ready. Would you have done exactly what we did, which is fine, or would you have gone a different route? What reformist or revolutionary movement, you have to pick 2. Which 2 would you have selected? Take a minute to think about it, because you're going to have to do this eventually. So which 2 are for you? So looking at this prompt, looking at the sample, what 2, and it's important for you to pick, the reason why I'm pausing on this, I want to make sure you pick one out so that as we look through the rest of this, you are able to think about what contextualization and what evidence you'd use. So would you use the French Revolution and the American Revolution, or would you use 2 different ones? Or French Revolution and something else, American Revolution and something else? Think about this. It's important for you to nail it down here. Yep, French and Haitian, that would be a great one. You're here now, use that brain of yours. All right, so now that you have your 2 in mind, perfect. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at what contextualization you can use. So have the 2 in mind that you got. And I saw somebody saying, okay, I might use French and Haitian, but the similarities would be hard. Let's see. Let's first start with contextualization. That might be easier for any of the 2 that you pick than coming up with evidence. So contextualization, the part that made a lot of sense among American and French revolutions was discontent among the masses. Ask yourself, does that fit for Haitian Revolution too? Wait, does that usually fit for like all the revolutions? So contextualization, thankfully, is an important component, and it's not as hard as you think to add it in. We were talking about it yesterday, and your goal is to connect the dots. You are asked to think like an historian, and that means that you have to consider not just one tiny pinpoint within history. You have to either consider before or after, or another location at the same time. So contextualization, adding in a layer of analysis is what you're trying to do. And that's what leads to points. We're not having you do it because we think it's like the most fun ever. It might be, but it really is so that you can get your points. So serious discontent among the masses. I mentioned taxation without representation. And this is a sample. So I chose to write inequitable wealth and power. You don't have to say it like that. You could say that the nobles and the church had all the money. They did. All the money. Well, nearly all the money. You can say it however you want as long as it's factually accurate. So consider what you would have used for contextualization. And yes, you most certainly could put the 7 Years' War in contextualization for this question, Emily. Yep, for sure. Because that explains how Britain had no money and was like, ooh, where can we get money? Let's tax the colonists. Oh, what a good plan. They won't mind. They'll be super excited about that. Yeah, Britain was hard up for cash. And so they said, great, let's get some money from, right over there. Yeah, it didn't go well. Okay, now we have evidence. What I'm going to do here is we want to look at the ingredients within this delicious evidence sandwich that made it so high scoring, or would make it high scoring if this were an answer for an FRQ. All right, so we are looking at liberty and equality. Oh, I feel like we mentioned that in a different answer. Wait a second. Wait a second. Can you use similar evidence in two different questions? Two unrelated questions? Can you like use the same evidence? Yeah, you can. Don't write about everything that's totally the same throughout the entire test, but the ideas of the Enlightenment affected a lot of different things, and they might ask it in a variety of ways. So don't shy away from putting in your details that you know well, because you want to give a very delicious evidence sandwich. Okay, so and this is all coming from that short answer question we're doing. So they have the right to overthrow an oppressive government. So that's a piece of evidence that's delicious right there in our evidence sandwich. And then the piece that this goes towards contextualization and evidence, the success in America, so that's prior to the French Revolution, they encouraged their citizens to band together, and looking after, oh, all the dots are getting connected. Afterwards, both America and the French came up with constitutional governments. Hey, all the pieces came together. All right, so take a moment to, I'm actually gonna go ahead and underline that part. Just a moment. All right, now take a moment to reflect. Do you, at this time, have enough information in your brain to execute those three pieces? You might not. That's totally fine. Which part of this process do you need to practice? Do you need more facts and evidence? Do you need more practice with contextualization, bridging the gaps among history and figuring out how they're connected? Do you have a problem trying to write a thesis? That's a thing. It can be a thing for a variety of reasons, whether it's stress-induced or you just don't have enough practice yet. There's so many materials out there, and of course we recommend Kaplan materials, but you can use anything you want to make sure that you are bolstering your personal skills, because you can't phone a friend and you're going to have to do it on your own in this new test exam format, the 45-minute FRQ. So we want to make sure you have an idea of what you need to do between now and when you take your exam, including coming to hang out with us. We want to make sure you have everything that you need to do well, because we care about how you're feeling and what you're going to be doing on test day. So gut check time. Feel free to share with us if you feel like you're far away from being ready. You can let everyone know and think about how many hours you want to put towards this. Do you want to study an hour a day? Do you want to block off 5 hours a week? Make sure you find time in your schedule to do this. In the meantime, we've got about 20 minutes left, and we're going to make some of that, the gap between where you're at and where you want to be by the time you take the test, we're going to bridge it a little bit, because I've got another high yield content area for you. So for industrialization, this gives us an opportunity to connect ideas. If you're wondering how to best connect ideas, figure out what type of learner you are. If you are a visual learner, consider timelines. Those are a great way, especially, I'm sure you've seen those awesome timelines where it shows not only a horizontal representation of the timeline within one section of the world, but it goes down vertically for all the other areas that had major events happening. Have you seen those really awesome timelines? That's a great way for you to see different pieces within the same era and eras before and eras after, and see how they're all connected. And you can connect it in any logical way that you find. So consider that. If you're not a visual learner, go back to your notes and think about how when you're reading something like a revolution or a war, you can then pause in your studying and go find either something that happened before, at the same time, or after, and ask yourself a series of questions. So we've got some time left together. Let's put it to good use. Industrialization. This hopefully is an area that you feel pretty comfortable in. It is likely to be on the exam. It's a high yield content area. And we want you to know some of the specifics so you can put them into your very delicious evidence sandwich. So technological advancements, the first thing, especially in contextualization, is to consider how this was made possible. So whether you're thinking about the technology itself or the access to natural resources, or you want to think about the government has to be stable enough for people to have the time, energy, and effort to look into this, all of that's important. Likely though, what you want to concentrate on the most is the impact of industrialization. So domestic impact and global impact. Domestic impact, wait, that's for each country. So which country are we talking about here on the left-hand side of the domestic impact? We're talking about the industrialized nations. So whichever nations were embracing this industrialization, most of which was happening in Europe. And then global impact. So domestic impact, it's not specific to one nation, it's all the industrialized nations. So also happening in brand new United States. And then the global impact. So these are all ingredients that you can use as evidence. So knowing how it happened, how did industrialization come about, and then what happened afterwards is all important, not only for multiple choice questions, like the ones you've been answering all year, but also those FRQs, which you're going to have to answer for your exam. So we're going to start with a multiple choice question. Right-hand side. So we're talking about industrialization. It's a graph of railroads. This is not surprising. Go ahead and take a minute to answer this question, and then we will move over to an FRQ. We've got answers coming in. Awesome. Feeling good about this question. Makes a lot of sense. Expansion of railroad networks definitely coincided with industrialization for a variety of reasons. Having the money to be able to do that, but also you need to transport a lot of raw material and then the refined goods that you make with that raw material. Makes a lot of sense. Awesome. And in particular, this was focused on Europe. We don't have anything with the United States in this particular graph. Okay, so this is a question you likely have practiced before. Let's take this thinking. The idea of industrialization had an effect on a lot of different things in different countries at the same time, in the same time period. And let's take a look at an FRQ. So this one's another short answer question, and we have to do 3 separate tasks. As I mentioned before, it doesn't have any bearing. A doesn't have a bearing on B, B doesn't have a bearing on C, and so forth. So you need to identify one change in part A, another change, particularly in social structure in B, and one continuity. All right, let's take a look at what this looks like for an answer. Go ahead and take a moment to read this, and then we'll talk about what you may have put, or if you would go with this particular answer that we have on the board. All right, I'm going to start underlining some of the ingredients of this that are important to consider when you're creating your own. Go ahead and throw into the chat what you would have said instead, or would you have gone with something similar to what we have here? So would you have gone with export economies and the demand for raw materials, or would you have gone in a different direction? And really, as long as you can provide evidence to support your answer, then you can get points. There's no actual correct, one singular correct answer. That would be horrible and really difficult for students to replicate. That's not nice. And it's really not a good way to test your knowledge. You didn't learn just one thing that's important. You learned lots of things, and then you have to demonstrate that knowledge. So go ahead and put in the chat. Take a moment to consider this. Global trade, what changed because of industrial technology? What changed? So we have people, some people are going with a similar direction. Other people are considering what they might put for B. That's a good thing to think ahead. There's a widening gap between, so this is a great answer, widening gap between industrialized and non-industrialized nations. That then will greatly affect 1900 to the present. So even though that part of the test is not being specifically tested, you can reference the fact that what happened in 1750 to 1900 directly affected what happened later. You absolutely can put that as contextualization. Fantastic. I'm so glad you all are thinking about this, because this is the part that is valuable to you, using your brain to consider what you would do. Because I don't know if you know this, but I cannot accompany you on test day, other than the fact that I am just one human. That wouldn't make a lot of sense, but also it's not a buddy system. You do have to do it on your own. Let's take a look. I know some of you have been considering B already. Let's take a look at B. And this is an example, and this is not the full answer, most certainly, but this is an example of something you could start with, and then you can add in more details. So one of the social factors was the formation of the working class. Now be careful. If you start talking about social structure in non-industrialized states, and by states they mean countries, you're not going to get your point, even if everything you say is factually accurate. You have to answer the question asked. So consider right now, what would you discuss about social structure? Now it says industrialized states. You can put a broad statement like I did, formation of the working class, and then say, for example, in Britain, ... and add in specific examples. So throw in the chat what it is you're thinking about for this particular part. Would you have gone with the working class, or would you have picked something else? And then add any details that you already know. You don't have to Google, you don't have to look back in your notes. You already happen to know something about the social structure of industrialized states. What do you already know? Think back, dig into those pathways of your brain and figure out what memory you can recall. We'll give you a few more moments to consider that before we head on to C. And then we're going to finish up with one final FRQ for the day. So keep in mind, this is your second to last FRQ. Put your brain to work. Oh, labor unions. Akil, great job. That's a great thing to consider. Think about what didn't exist before that suddenly does, and it is within the social realm. And in that case, would answer this question. Just make sure you stay in industrialized states. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, awesome, yes, the gap between the rich and, well, not awesome for poor people, but yes, the gap the gap was exacerbated. It greatly increased. Good. Okay, now we're going to turn our brains to a continuity. Continuity. You could have done something such as the differences in gender roles, meaning that the gender roles stayed the same, that there was a difference between people who identified as male and people who identified as female and what they did. You could have done that. This one in particular, I focused on difficult living conditions. Industrialization didn't make countries more wealthy, but people in the lowest social classes continued to struggle. So I'm going to go ahead and underline some of the key components that make this a very robust, evidence-laden answer. So specifically, you have to state what it is that you're saying. And then rural farmers really didn't have a lot of control. And then few rights for the working class, which was continued to be the same, and barely made enough money, just 5. Those were the words I used. You could say it in a different way. You could say, generally want to stay away from colloquialisms, just sayings that we have, or idioms. So you don't want to say they had barely enough to scrape by if you can help it, just so you're as specific as possible. Or couldn't make ends meet. You want to be specific. You can say barely had enough money to pay for a place to stay and food to put on the table. You want to be as specific as possible. Yes, urbanization as a continuity. That is a good thing to consider. The fact that even before then, there was a movement towards the cities, and cities continue to play an important role. Yep, really, you can sell just about anything with specific evidence that answers the question. So you want to be really persuasive in what you're saying. Specific evidence that answers the question. All right, so we have just a little time left. I'm going to go ahead and go through these key takeaways and then look at a final question. And it's more of a choose your own adventure situation. So first, with key takeaways, all we need you to consider here is the fact that we did go over the Enlightenment. It was definitely a key component of not only the era before now, but also, and by now I mean 1750 to 1900, but also the revolutions and the reform movements. Then we have cultural identity. So you have a lot of knowledge around that. Keep in mind that people were considering their cultural identities, and that helped to inform those reform movements and the revolutions. And then we just talked about industrialization. So these are just some takeaways from today. So just the capstone of what we were talking about. So with this in mind, we have one final FRQ. I included this. Journey and I want you to consider the different ways the same concept can be asked. So this is very similar to that short answer question we just looked at. We are now looking at, this would essentially be what an LEQ would look like. And we're including it so that before we have the information from College Board about what the question is going to look like, we can assure you that the skills are the same. So when we were doing the short answer question, you were thinking about evidence, you were thinking about being persuasive, and you were thinking about answering the question asked. Evidence, persuasiveness, answer the question, you have to do that with this one too. So we don't have the information yet, no one does. The College Board is going to let us know in a couple weeks, but in the meantime, you don't have to pause your studying. You can continue to look at free response questions. We're going to be doing it all week long, and you can get ready for your 45-minute exam. So for this particular one, the thesis, the contextualization, and the evidence, we're going to show you the examples that you could use. You could use the agricultural revolution, you could use the Enlightenment, you could use European participation in global trade, you could think about Great Britain. You have a lot of options. Contextualization, you have options. This is about choose your own adventure. If you're answering this question and you know age of exploration better than you know agricultural production, use that instead. This exercise, what I'm showing you right now, right here, is how you have a lot of options as long as you're confident in your ability to recall these important themes within world history. And finally, you've got a lot of options for evidence. So the takeaway from this particular part of the presentation today is that you can do this. You can get your points. You can be successful, and we really want to help you. So definitely spread the word. Let us know what else we can do to help. Feel free to throw it in the chat and join us later today. Continue to talk with us. We're here to help you, and we are so excited that you're able to come here today and join us. We certainly hope to see you again tomorrow. Thanks so much.